Hello, my dear ones. It is at times like this, after a week or two of endless storms and winds and darkness, that these videos become very difficult to record. Because in that weather, something happens inside. Winter time in general, something happens inside, where layer after layer, blanket after blanket of silence and the need for solitude and a need to be alone with Christ and with your prayer. All these layers of desired, longed for silence and loneliness make it very difficult to even acknowledge in your heart the presence of a world outside the monastery. The presence of a world outside this small little island of Iona. But at the same time, this is when my heart grows. These are the months when my heart nourishes. And it nourishes precisely on this silence and on these blankets of being alone with Christ. And it is at this time that silly questions arise to a monk's heart. And for the last week or so, I've actually lived almost constantly with one such question, and I'd like to share that with you because it's a question that's been very helpful to me, and I pray that somehow it will help you as well. For some reason, the thought of having Christ present physically next to me occurred a few weeks ago, and I took it down in a note in my journal. A day with Christ. If Christ came in his body and you got this amazing chance of spending one day with Christ, alone with him, what would you do? What would you say if you had all that time with Christ, if you had him to yourself entirely for all that time, one full day with Christ? What would you say? And I went through everything, and I went through, of course, the ridiculousness of the question itself, because Christ is with me. Christ is with you every single fraction of every single second of this life. He is here with us. Only that, see, this shows the difference between what we call reality, things we see with our eyes, we perceive with our senses, and our faith. This shows, this betrays, it's a better word, how frail, how weak our faith is, because Christ is here right now as I record this video, and Christ is there with you right now as you listen to this video, as you watch it. And yet it takes this sort of question, this sort of spiritual mental exercise to trigger something in my heart. What if I had him here present physically? What would I tell him? Would I start writing essays about my needs? Would I start writing essays about why I fail him every single second of my life? Would I start writing essays about the needs of the world, about the wars that are destroying this humanity, about the disaster, the self-made disaster, the suicide, the universal suicide of what we're doing with our planet, with our climate and environment? I look at the saints, I look at my saint, I look at Fr Seraphim, and when he saw Christ, he was paralyzed. When he saw Christ as a deacon, as a young deacon in his monastery, as he went out to read the prayers for the congregation, and he saw Christ coming out of the icon, the royal icon, surrounded by the angelic beings, he just froze. And people in the church and people in the altar realized something had happened to him because he just froze. They had to come out of the altar to carry him back inside, and he needed a long time to recover from that vision of Christ bodily coming towards him. Of course he would freeze, And of course we would collapse in our paralysis, because any meeting with Christ is a moment of judgment. Any meeting with our Maker is a moment of judgment. And this is the way we should relate with these moments. This is the way we should relate to going to receive communion. It is a moment of judgment, because we commune with our Maker, with our Creator. We meet Him in His body, in His blood. And in that moment of judgment, some of us will collapse because of our sinfulness and because of our weaknesses and our bad use of our free will and the bad choices we have made and continue to make in our lives. We will just collapse into our nothingness. And this is why Christ doesn't show Himself to everyone. Because most of us, the very extreme large majority of humanity, would collapse back into nothingness, because that's what we've made. That's the reality we've made for ourselves in eternity. And if you were one of the few fortunate ones who could stand before Christ, if you were to see Him, you would not be you anymore, in the sense that you would no longer be the fallen version, the sinful version of you. You would instantly, in order to perceive God, you have to be like God. In order to perceive Him, you would have to be one with Him. And your eternal being, your eternal self, would become manifested in you. And then I wonder, in that paralysis of a saint, in that silence, blessed silence, in that solitude with the one who made you, in that peace and in that grace, what words would you tell Christ? You know, the saints speak of silence as the sacrament, the mystery of the world to come. And I think it is in this sort of meditation, in this sort of spiritual exercise, that begins to make sense. Not logically, because our brains can not serve us when it comes to these realities, but it begins to make spiritual sense, because indeed, when your heart made of nothing beats next to the heart of the one who made you out of nothing and brought you into being out of non-being, when your created heart beats next to the uncreated heart of the one who made you, what words are there to be said? And what actions are there to be done apart from this collapse into Him, collapse into being, into an act of pure being, God's being? It is in times like this, when it's dark outside and when the storms are howling and when the clouds close in so visibly that you can almost reach out and grab, a fluffy cloud, and they create this igloo like a beehive, like an igloo above our house, above our community, above our island, to the point that you forget that there is a reality, there is a world out there. It is in moments like this, when you perceive beyond the winds a silence that somehow disappears in the summer, and a stillness beyond the madness and the chaos of the storms, a stillness and a silence that become impossible to perceive, even here on Iona, in the summer, in the hustle and the bustle and the chaos of the invasion of the world. And from here, from this stillness and this silence, I know that I would have nothing to tell Christ. I would just become an act of self-giving. I don't know how else to describe it. I would just, because this is what my heart longs to do now, I would just want to throw myself into Him, to disappear in Him, to melt in Him, to be buried in Him, to become anything and everything that He has created me to become. And I understand, again, not logically, but in a spiritual sense, why silence and stillness are mysteries of the eternal kingdom and of the world to come. That's all I had for you today, my beloved ones. I keep you all in my prayer. Please keep me and our monasteries on Mull and on Iona in your prayers and in your support. May God's love be with all of us, beloved ones. Amen. Amen. Amen.